9:30. We have quorum, and it's our privilege today to welcome the Minister Blair, to the committee for his first appearance, although no stranger to appearances before the committee. I did, colleagues, make an executive decision to extend his time from a one-time extension from 5 minutes to 7, and in anticipation of that, I hope we're all caffeinated, appropriately caffeinated. So with that, Minister, I'm sure you'll introduce your colleagues, and we look forward to what you have to say for the next few minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I will, if I may, just take a quick moment to introduce my table mates. To my far left is Chief Carolyn Xavier from the Communications Security Establishment, my Deputy Minister of National Defence, Mr. Bill Matthews. I think perhaps would need no introduction to this committee, but our Chief of Defence, General Wayne Eyre, and from the Judge Advocate General, Colonel Stephen Strickey. Let me begin my remarks by simply saying thank you for your kind invitation. As you've noted, Mr. Chair, this is my first appearance before this committee. And if I may, allow me to begin my remarks by saying that I very sincerely hope. I have tracked the work of this committee, and I think it's done some exceptional work over the past many years. And I have had the opportunity now to meet with a number of them, in particular my critics, but all of us, I believe, are committed to many of the same things. And I would very sincerely hope that in the future I and the people before you will be able to work with this committee in order to bring about positive change for the Canadian Armed Forces and to ensure that Canada has a robust and well-equipped armed forces in order to support and protect Canada's interest at home and abroad. I would also want to begin my remarks as well by saying that my first priority, my goal, is really centered on the men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces. I think that is our first obligation. I think, you know, when we can, and I'm sure we will, have a number of conversations about various equipment for platforms, for ships and planes and submarines and ammunition and artillery. And all of those things are important, and it's good that this committee will focus on it. But I want to assure all of you, my first focus is on the men and women who serve in the Canadian Armed Forces. I think they are the strength of the organization, and I'm very mindful of my responsibility, and if I may say so, our collective responsibility to them. First of all, to make sure that they have a work environment which is inclusive, respectful, supportive, and safe for every member of the service, that we provide them with the appropriate supports to make sure that we can attract the very best and the brightest to the Canadian Armed Forces. I have become really struck by some of the challenges we're facing as I visited some of the bases and wings, and I hope to have an opportunity to do that, much more of that. But I've listened very carefully to the men and women who serve there, and they've talked to me about some of the challenges they're facing with housing, with childcare, getting a family doctor, and some of the really significant challenges that make it difficult for men and women to serve in the Canadian Armed Forces. And we've got to address those things, and I want to assure you all that I'm committed to that. I also wanted to be very clear that I'm building on the excellent work of my predecessor, Minister Anand, and it is my intention to continue to work with our team and all of you to keep moving forward so that we can meet the greatest challenges the armed forces are facing today, but also into the future. And this comes down, as I've said, to three very important aspects: the people, as I've already mentioned, modernization, and operations. And today I'll take a brief moment, if I may, and by all means cut me off, and I'll come back to these things later upon questions, Mr. Chair. I've already spoken to you a little bit about the people. I wanted to also acknowledge the important work of Madam Justice Louise Arbour. The 48 recommendations that she has provided to us, I think, provide us with an excellent roadmap, a path forward to implement her recommendations to create a protected, respected, and empowered environment for everyone who serves. I want to assure you all that of our commitment, my commitment, to ensure that we implement all of those recommendations, but we do so in a way which is thoughtful, consultative, And I'm going to come back to this later on, if not in my remarks, but certainly in my response to questions, because frankly, I need this committee's help in making some of the important decisions on how we implement those recommendations in a timely way, but also to achieve the intent of creating a really supportive environment for everyone. Similarly, I can tell you as well that the Chief of the Professional Conduct and Culture is about to launch a public database for all the defense team research and policies related to sexual harassment and misconduct, and this is in recommendation, in response to Madam Arbour's recommendation. We've taken some very important steps just in the past few weeks to begin to put into action some of those recommendations, but we're also going to have to bring forward legislation. And in bringing forward legislation, the only path to that, in my opinion, is through this committee. And so rather than just come to this committee when the legislation is drafted and drop it in front of you and ask you then to report on it, I would like the opportunity, Mr. Chair, and members of this committee to work with you in making sure that that legislation is the right legislation. And that doesn't in any way preclude your ability to deal with it as a parliamentary committee, and Parliament should after that legislation's dropped, but I'd really like your help in getting it right. It's too important not to get right. And so I'm going to come to you and ask you for that help. With respect to modernization, in 2017, as you're all very well aware, we launched the Strong, Secure, and Engaged Defense Policy. And since that time, we've actually made some real progress. We've, for example, have received 4 of our 6 Arctic and offshore patrol ships. That happened to be in Halifax a few weeks ago for the International Fleet Week, and had the opportunity to see one of those ships. And let me also suggest the delivery of 4 of those ships was not without its challenges, but we're making real progress on it. We have invested in armored combat support vehicles to replace the current LAV fleet. We've made some very significant progress in procuring the F-35 fighter. And we have obtained many smaller but significant items, such as new night vision goggles, replacement firearms, and other matters. But it's important to acknowledge to you all as well, the threat environment is evolving rapidly. And to address the challenges, we've also announced and launched a defense policy update. Now, the SSE remains our primary roadmap for the military's future. But through the DPU, we are building on that policy to ensure we're ready to meet our biggest threats across a variety of domains. We have begun critical work in bolstering the continental defense, and we are investing over $38 billion over the next 20 years to modernize NORAD. I've had a number of discussions with our American colleagues and the U.S. ambassador, and in that regard, we'll be able to speak to that more if you have questions, and we will be continuing to work with our U.S. partners to ensure that NORAD remains capable of protecting North America for now and in response to emerging threats in the future. As I've said, the shape and scope of modern warfare is evolving, and we are investing in our military so it will have the capabilities that it needs. And with respect to operations, and I see you giving me the appropriate signal, you're all aware, and many of you had the opportunity to visit our people in LID, in the UK, and in Europe, and you're well aware of the work it's doing. I'm not going to repeat all that for you. But I wanted to acknowledge something that has been primarily my responsibility. Through Operation Lentus, I have been calling over the past 4 years and previous responsibilities upon the Canadian Armed Forces every time Canada needed them. So when we had the pandemic and we needed help in the long-term care facilities in Ontario and Quebec, when we had devastating floods and wildfires and hurricanes and other natural disasters across the country, Canada has called upon the Canadian Armed Forces over and over again. And I'm sure the General will tell me how many times that is. But, for example, they've been fighting fires so far this summer for over 120 consecutive days.
131.
131 consecutive days in this country. I want to acknowledge, first of all, that has been impactful on the Canadian Armed Forces. But I also want to take the opportunity to say thanks. Because every time Canadians needed them, they were there for them. And it reminds me how important the CAF is. It reminds me how important the men and women who serve in CAF are. And it reminds me as well how proud all Canadians were and how grateful all Canadians were that they were there for us. And we'll do everything that is necessary to make sure that we're there for them as they continue to serve. That's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Minister Blair. Mr. Bazan, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Minister, welcome to committee. I know you've been a committee before, but not national defense, so I'm glad to see you here. Have you received your mandate letter from the Prime Minister yet?
No, I've not yet. I'm still on. I've not yet received a new mandate letter, and I'm acting on the mandate letter that was provided to my predecessor, Minister Anand.
So when you have that, that'll be made public, I hope, or at the very least you'll table it with committee?
I would be happy to share it.
Okay.
I think it's my mandate letter, but it's a responsibility I think we all share.
Okay. Over the past several days, Canada's gone through a major embarrassment with what happened in the House of Commons. And as someone of Ukrainian descent, it's something that I've been very disturbed by and very concerned about how this is, how the problems that we experienced and the lack of response from the Prime Minister on this for 5 days has impacted our reputation on the world stage. Have you had a chance to talk to Defense Minister Rustem Umerov from Ukraine about this and reassure him of Canada's support?
I have not had the opportunity to. Mr. Rustem, I know where he is right now, and I know who he's working with because there are other international visits that are taking place in Kiev with him right now. But we did reach out, and we have communicated our deep regret for what took place in the House of Commons last Friday. And actually, James, if I may, I would take the opportunity right now. I, like all of us, stood in that House. I came to my feet. I was not acting on complete information. But I personally deeply regret that, and I would acknowledge my individual responsibility and apologize for it.
So have you had any conversations with any of our allies who have shared concerns about what happened here in the House of Commons and its impact on, that support from Canadians, in supporting Ukraine in this brutal war that they have with the Russian invaders? And of our allies, because we have seen some pretty strong rhetoric coming from our ally Poland, as an example.
I have personally had conversations just this week, subsequent to the events of Friday, with the ambassador from the United States and with the High Commissioner from Australia. We spoke briefly about that. They did not express concerns directly to me. I think they understood how unfortunate this was and frankly embarrassing for Parliament. I did not hear from them that it was affecting their confidence or our relationship.
I just want to state for the record that, again, Conservatives stand with Ukraine. We support the government's support for Ukraine and everything you've done. We just ask you to do more. So that is unwavering. Ukraine must win this war. I also want to echo your words to the great men and women who serve in the Canadian Armed Forces for the work that they're doing here in Canada in Operation Laser, Operation Lennis, Operation Vector. It's been just outstanding and something that we all take pride in. But, as committee, we've seen the guys working in Operation Unifier, training Ukrainian soldiers in Camp Lid. We've seen our guys and the great job they're doing in leading EFP Latvia. So we're certainly grateful for each and every one of them. But we have a problem in keeping and getting new recruits into the Canadian Armed Forces. It's been 8 years now that the Liberals have been in power, and I don't think we've ever had troop strength so low. Now, we've heard at committee here it's around 16,000 short. I know that when I sent an order paper question in back in April, that Mr. May had actually said troop strength was only about 8,000. What is the actual number? How short are we on the number of members we have in the Canadian Armed Forces today?
We've been in the last 3 years. We've lost more people than we've been able to recruit, but we're turning it around. I'm going to turn, if I may, to the Chief of Defense because he just shared with me just a few moments ago before I began to speak. What I think is some pretty good news in that regard, and I think we should share it with the committee.
Well, we'll deal with that in the second hour when we just have General Eyre and officials there. I wanted your comment on it and what you see as the shortage, what the number is, and what you are going to do about it as Minister of National Defence. Because this is by far, as General Eyre said in the past, it's the existential threat facing Canada is that we don't have enough men and women serving in the Canadian Armed Forces.
There are a number of things that we are doing, and that the Canadian Armed Forces is doing in order to improve our recruitment. I'll just, as an example, the Royal Canadian Navy has a program where they're actually bringing people in for a 12-month period, and there's 8 weeks of training, and then they're deployed on ships and given a lot of different exposure to different functions within the Navy. All of that, I think, is a really good way to introduce people. I'd also say that when I was in Halifax for the International Fleet Week, seeing those sailors walking around the streets of Halifax in their brilliant white uniforms, I think that was an inspiration to me, but I also hope it was an inspiration to all sorts of young people that witnessed that and saw that there was a career to be had in the Canadian Forces.
And last question before I get cut off by the chair. The issue around strong security engaged and having the defense policy update, where are we at with it? The Liberals, you guys promised a plan on how to get things built and how to fund it. It's already $10 billion, according to the PBO, $10 billion short of the money that was supposed to be attributed. We got ships that are rotting out right now. We're hearing that we've got frigates that are having trouble getting to sea, submarines that we can't keep in water, and yet all the major projects to replace those are sliding to the left and are years off before we see any replacements. So where's the DPU, and how are you going to make sure that we actually get the money spent to get the kit our troops, our sailors, and our aircrew need?
Unfortunately, Mr. Bazan has run out of time on his question. I'm sure we'll come back on it. Colleagues, I'm trying to get in 2 full rounds, so I have to be fairly disciplined because I'm sure you'll want to talk to the minister. So, Mr. Fisher, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister Blair, for being here, and your team. Thank you very much. General, Colonel, thank you very much for your service to our country. Bill, we talk a lot in this committee, and we have talked a lot in this committee about recruitment and retention, and you heard it touched on already today. By focusing on the importance of building a more inclusive and diverse defense team, by ensuring that everyone who serves in the CAF or works at DND has a healthy workplace free from harassment, discrimination, sexual misconduct, and violence, that's going to help recruiting efforts, and it will help retain the incredible, the amazing skilled personnel that we have today. Now, you've acknowledged that it's not your personal mandate letter, but the Minister of Defense's mandate letter makes it very clear that reforms are necessary and an absolute priority. I'm interested to hear about why this is a priority for you personally as the new minister. I recognize that culture change isn't going to happen overnight. But can you give us a snapshot of where we are today on these reforms and where you personally are hoping to go?
Okay, thanks, Darren. I think this is the most important question because sometimes you've got to put more than just words to a commitment to the men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces and ensuring that they have a work environment that is truly safe, that they feel supported, respected, and inclusive. One of the things that the Canadian Armed Forces has embarked upon is an effort to bring greater diversity, to recruit women into the Canadian Forces in greater numbers, Indigenous people, and people who have a diversity of perspectives, who know what it's like to be an immigrant, for example, or to face discrimination. And if you're going to, and by the way, that diversity of perspective is going to make the Canadian Armed Forces stronger, more resilient, and more capable. But if you're going to attract that diversity and keep it within the organization and to nurture it and support it into leadership positions, we have to make sure that we take all the steps necessary. I also want to acknowledge, Darren, there is so much about the Canadian Armed Forces which is a proud tradition. It's a commitment to service and sacrifice. They have a long history of coming to our aid when we needed them. They have served in incredibly difficult circumstances and fought bravely on behalf of this country. There is much for the Canadian Armed Forces to be proud of. And at the same time, we know that there have been incidents within the forces themselves where people have felt less than respected, who have not felt supported, have not felt safe. And women who've experienced sexual harassment, people of color who've experienced racial discrimination, all of these things cannot be tolerated in the modern Canadian Armed Forces. And I'm not the only one that believes that, because I've heard that from the general. I've heard it from his entire command team, that unwavering commitment to support the men and women of their service. And so we are making some real strides. And just for example, one of the things, Justice Arbor's recommendations, I think, are extremely helpful in this regard. By the way, I met yesterday with the external monitor, Madam Therrien, who is giving us monthly reports and publishing quarterly reports and updates on the progress that is being made. I think that's incredibly valuable as well. But we've been able to take some steps very quickly. And for example, recommendation 5, with respect to the investigation and the prosecution of sexual assault offenses arising within the Canadian Armed Forces. We took interim measures in response to that. There's going to have to be legislative changes, but we put some measures in place so that now 100% of the new cases are now being referred into the criminal justice system, the civilian criminal justice system. We also heard very clearly about concerns within the recommendations regarding the duty to report, or even having access to the Canadian human rights to have your complaint investigated. And so we're taking very quick steps, but let me also say that there's much more to do. I've had the opportunity, and don't get me wrong, I never served in the Canadian Armed Forces, but I did wear a uniform for a long period of time, and I had responsibility for a very diverse uniform workforce. And I knew there it was my responsibility to make sure that I protected and made safe every member of that service. And I believe that same commitment exists within the Canadian Armed Forces. It is my first priority. I don't think all the investments in boats and planes and equipment are important, but none of them will help us achieve what we need to achieve if we don't create the right environment for the men and women who serve in the forces. And so it has to be our first priority.
Minute and a half. Okay, thank you very much for that, Minister Blair. Back home in Nova Scotia, folks are very, very proud of our Arctic offshore patrol ships. And the Margaret Brooke, of course, you know, when it was touring the Arctic, everybody, and myself included, were bursting with pride. There's a growing interest in this region in Canada's north, and it's no secret that since the start of Russia's war, unprovoked war in Ukraine, there's even more interest. Can you speak to some of the investments that we're making to promote and defend our Arctic sovereignty, and maybe what we're doing in partnership with our allies in the north?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question, and I agree it's an absolutely critical one for us. You know, we have international obligations to NATO. And we'll be happy to chat later on about how we are supporting our enhanced presence in Latvia and other things we're doing. We are supporting the Ukraine. We're significantly increasing our presence in the Indo-Pacific and being consistently present there. But I believe also that our first priority must be the protection of Canada. That is the first responsibility of the Canadian Armed Forces. And being present in the Arctic, the threats that Canada currently faces in almost every instance are coming from other hostile nations active in that region. And we need to be present there. It's one of the reasons our government announced a few years ago a $38 billion investment in the NORAD enhancement. And investing in such things as over-the-horizon radar systems and over-the-polar radar systems is important, but that's in and of itself is not enough. We need to be present there. We need to make sure that we have those Arctic offshore patrol boats present, that we support the Ranger program and the presence of Canadian Armed Forces. We've invested in the F-35 jet that's going to give us...
leave that shopping list
and we're
right
going to
there.
have to leave that until the next round.
Yes, indeed. That's a lot of investment, indeed. Madame Normandine, 6 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Minister, for being with us today. We really appreciate it. Yes, I just want to be sure that you're hearing me. Can you hear the interpretation? Thank you, Minister. We're very happy to see you here today. Thank you for being available. I want to start with a question that refers to your former role. There was an increase in the climate crisis, but you were the Minister for Civil Protection, and it was up to you if there was a lack of capacity on the part of the federal government and the provincial governments, but you've changed to the other side now. We have the participation of the Canadian Armed Forces who have to respond when there are weather incidents. And can you tell us then what you are going to do and how you see their role to meet this necessary task, given the climate change?
Thank you for the question. Let me just speak a little bit, if I may, about the wildfires that took place in Quebec. It is primarily the responsibility of the provincial authority and local authorities to respond in the first instances to those fires. But I was in close contact with François Bonnadel, Mr. Bonnadel from the Quebec government, who quickly identified that they needed some help. We did call upon the Canadian Armed Forces, but we also went looking for other resources through the Canadian Forest Fire Resource Center, Interagency Center, CFC. in order to access additional resources from other provinces, first of all. We also, in my conversations with Minister Bonadell, I reached personally out to the United States and made arrangements with their FEMA people to gain access to additional firefighters, firefighting equipment, and air and water bombers, in order to provide that assistance. But we were very fortunate, and the Canadian Armed Forces were able to quickly respond as well as they did, by the way, for the fires in Nova Scotia, in Alberta, in the Northwest Territories, and in British Columbia. And there was a very significant deployment of those resources. I had conversations at the time with the Chief of Defense, and of course we've had many more robust conversations about the impact of those deployments. I think it is one of the responsibilities to be there for Canadians when we need them, but it had a very significant impact on their capabilities, their capacity to respond to other duties in Canada and around the world. It impacted on their training facilities. And I believe it also had an impact on the men and women who serve, because responding to those very difficult and dangerous situations can be a real challenge for them. They were away from their families and their communities for a period of time. I think it's incumbent upon us, even though we call upon them and we take full advantage of that resource, to always remember the cost that the Canadian Armed Forces and their members are paying for that service. And we're working very carefully with our provincial partners to make sure that we find every way to help the provinces when they need our help, to help Canadians when they need our help, but also to make sure that we're mindful of the impact it's having on the CAF.
Merci beaucoup et on en profite pour remercier les membres.
Thank you, and we also want to thank all of those who participated fighting the forest fires. I go back to Mr. Bazan's question with respect to the defense policy update. It's an over 10-year period of time. Some $15 million are required in cuts from various departments. So defense is saying then that it's not going to cut in defense, in infrastructure, in international affairs. Well, if that is the case where defense can't cut, where will it cut?
It's a very difficult and challenging question. The fiscal environment in Canada right now requires that when we are spending Canadian taxpayers' dollars, that we do it carefully and thoughtfully. I've always looked upon the expenditure of tax dollars as an investment in creating public value for Canadians. And it is incumbent upon all of our departments to make sure that we're doing that as carefully and as appropriately as possible. And at the same time, I also want to assure you, and every member of this committee, of our unwavering commitment to make sure that we support the Canadian Armed Forces with the people that are doing the work and getting them the equipment that they need. And so we are looking very carefully at expenditures. It may require, for example, that we make different choices. And I thought the first thing I would offer in response to your question is that we would start to reduce significantly the professional services that we sometimes contract. And then you and I had a conversation about the excellent work that a private company does in supplying services to the College of Saint John. And I went back and shared that with our colleagues, and I said, we need to be careful here that we don't cut something that's producing real value and it's a good expenditure. And so I wanted to share that with you because I thought it was a very good intervention. But we do know that we have to look very carefully at expenditures. It may actually require some of the investments that we know we have to make. We may have to make over a longer period of time in response to the current fiscal situation. But I want to assure you of our commitment to still get that job done.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais essayer rapidement.
Thank you. Very quickly, one of the things that has been of interest to me is that people will go into the forces to go abroad. But is it a possibility for people to participate in offshore training, say, for 6 months at a time? There were peacekeeping missions through the UN. Could that be brought back to train people?
To that.
And the answer is yes, we'll look at that. But the Navy is doing something where they're allowing somebody not to sign up for 3 years, but for 12 months. We'll learn from that experience and see if there are other ways in which we can encourage people to come into the service.
I particularly appreciate Mr. Bazan's help to run this committee. Yes. The translation came through as 15 million, not 15, and I think that means 15 billion. Ms. Masson, 6 million. $6 million.
Excellent. He's never been so generous, this chair. Thank you, Minister, for appearing today, and to all the guests here. Canadians were really shocked to hear the story of ex-corporal Ariana Nolette, the military sexual trauma survivor who was denied her day in court because of the failing justice system in her case. In his ruling to stay her case, the judge stated that the case had an albatross of 9 months of delay under the military justice system, clasped stubbornly around its neck. And we have heard warnings that this is only a first case to be thrown out due to the concurrent jurisdiction issue. Now, this can be solved very, very quickly with a simple bill in the House, and I think that you can make some significant changes with a piece of legislation like that. But in terms of the larger reforms that are necessary, and as Arbor had said herself, she called it the graveyard of recommendations, not getting that bill right, I know is of concern to you. You expressed that before and today as well. So I think that we need that comprehensive plan, as you've said, and to work beyond partisanship. But I'm also concerned because when we heard from the external monitor at this committee, she specifically said that there was no comprehensive plan yet. So I'd like to know how that's changed since I know that it's been a short time since you've become minister, but I would like to know how that's changed. And I would like to know that we're providing the survivors with justice as quickly as we possibly can. So I'm wondering if you would act to bring forward legislation to end that concurrent jurisdiction issue to ensure that every survivor can get their day in court as they need it.
Okay. First of all, I can't eliminate that albatross of dual jurisdiction time simply with legislation. The Jordan principle is a principle that the court will take notice of, and if they've already spent a long period of time in the military justice system and now transitioned over to the civilian system, the civilian system has an obligation to take into account that time. And don't get me wrong, I understand the frustration and hurt that all victims will feel. They seek justice. And they seek some resolution. I think we also have an obligation to find every way to support them during that process as well. With respect to dealing with the legislation, first of all, we have taken interim steps to make that transition, and all those cases are now being referred into the criminal justice system. But I am also struck by the urgency. I'm going to jump back a little bit. I also met with the external monitor yesterday. We talked about the need for, a well-articulated strategic plan. I'd like to work on that with all of you, quite frankly. And we've had some conversation already, but I think there's much more work that needs to be done. In coming forward, I don't believe it might be possible. And if you have a different perspective, share it with me, please. But I think it would be very challenging to address all 48 of Justice Arbor's recommendations in legislation within the time period we currently have available to us. It would just simply take a long time. And so one of the conversation I want to have with all of you is help me prioritize and help us determine what we can and must deal with very quickly. I'm hoping to bring legislation before the House early in the new year because I need a window to pass that legislation. And I think that helping chart that path forward is part of articulating a strategic plan for moving it forward, but it's also going to require, I think, a collaborative effort on all of our part. And so I will come back to this committee and I'm going to ask for some help, not just in passing through a bill that we bring forward, but in actually crafting that bill.
Ultimately, that would be a very, very complicated bill that could take a lot of time. And like I said, I mean, right now you could end this concurrence of jurisdiction issue with something more simple. Now, there's also the power that you hold as a minister to task this committee itself with the creation of that bill in a very, hopefully, nonpartisan type way. Would you be interested in that?
As I've already articulated, I would very much like to be able to come with my team to this committee and to work with all of you. I believe that it is complicated, but we have hard choices to make. Frankly, those choices are mine, but I would like your input. I'd like your advice on those things that this committee would prioritize. Many of you have really important perspectives on this, and I want to understand that. We're also listening. There's a broad consultation taking place with our justice officials. There's a broad consultation taking place with victims and with Justice Arbor and the external monitor. But at the same time, I would like very much to be able to work with this committee. I hope we'll have the opportunity to do that in addressing those things which you'll help me identify as the greatest priority. And that's not to suggest for a moment I wanted to be very clear. All of Madam Justice Arbor's recommendations are important. Some of them can be done fairly quickly. Some of them will take more time. I want to be able to make the right choices, to do the right thing, to make real progress on this. I think we have an opportunity to do that, but there's an urgency to it. I will bring forward a clear articulation of a strategy to move forward, but I am going to come back to you and ask for your help.
30 seconds, please.
30 seconds, Chair?
30 seconds.
For heaven's sake. What's my 16 million? Okay. Ultimately, many people have recommended or have talked about the defense policy update. And in fact, actually, as I recall, the chair had said earlier in the spring that it was soon to arrive. We didn't hear a date. We didn't hear any sort of timeline from you on that. Could we get one?
Yeah, as soon as I've got a date, I'll share it with you. But it's a priority for me. There are still there's important work going on. I'm relatively new into the portfolio, and perhaps my arrival I hope it hasn't delayed that decision, but I need to be up to date on it, and because we're putting the work on it. But I have been well briefed of its importance. The threat environment has changed significantly. There are many new things that we need to invest in and work that needs to be done. The Chief of Defense, my Deputy Minister have been very clear about the importance of that work. I'll move forward with that as quickly as I can.
Thank you, Ms. Matson. $6 million doesn't go nearly as far as it used to. Shelby Nyman.
Perfect. Thank you. Earlier this year, General Eyre suggested, or was asked the question, is Canada's military ready for the challenges ahead? His response was, no. That's why it's so important that we reconstitute our force, get our numbers back up, and that we get the capabilities in place that are relevant for the future security environment. So recognizing that the intent and the goodwill is maybe there, we need to hone in on tangible metrics to ensure that progress is actually happening. So my first question is, how many applicants has the CAF had since the reconstitution order was announced?
Hang on a second, I'll look that up because I'd like to give you an accurate number, and I know I've got appearance on that. Somebody's going to point me at it.
If you don't have it right at your fingertips, perhaps you could circle back to us in a note.
30K this fiscal year.
This fiscal year so far, 30,000 people have come through the door and put their hand up, and we're working through those applications.
Okay, perfect. And do we know how many of these applicants are citizens and how many have been through as a result of the permanent resident program?
Yes, ma'am. It's about 70-30. 70% are Canadian citizens. About 30% of the new applicants we've received are coming from permanent residents.
Okay, thank you. And for a successful applicant, what is the average length of time from application to acceptance of a prospective CAF member?
I may have to turn to our officials to tell that because I'm not sure of that amount of time. But I will point out for you, one of the challenges that we have been facing is in what we refer to as background checks, particularly for the cohort of permanent residents. But we've also recognized that they've all been subject to background checks through IRCC in order to become permanent residents. So we're working with IRCC to see if we can use the work that was done there to apply it to expedite this process.
So could you suggest how this process compares to that of our ally nations or NATO allies? And how can we get troops through the doors quicker?
Yeah, thanks. And it is a question I've actually raised with our allies, defense ministers, but also the general's been kind enough to introduce me to a number of people. Almost all of our like nations are facing the same challenge in recruiting. It appears, by the way, and I've been told only the Marines so far are not struggling getting recruits to the door, but it is a challenge. But I think it's also an opportunity.
So it appears to me that the problem is the delay in processing the applicants. So if we have 1 million applicants that are wanting to get through and we can't process them, then where's the holdup?
Well, there are 30,000 applicants, and we're working through them as quickly as possible. First of all, it's really important when they're hiring, they are also intent on hiring the very best.
So if the
people.
reconstitution
and we're also
effort,
looking for certain skills that will also enhance the capability of the Canadian Armed Forces.
No, and I respect that. But if the reconstitution effort has focused on recruitment, is there any focus on recruiting the people that actually process the applicants? And is prioritization given to human resources and medical trades?
Yes, ma'am. And I will tell you that's an important part of the work that we are doing in the defense policy update, looking at not only people who process recruits, but in investments in digitizing some of those systems so that we can move more efficiently.
Excellent, thank you. Next question. You mentioned earlier with regards to the Naval Experience Program. How many individuals are currently taking place in this?
I think the number was about, I think there were 142 applicants. I had the opportunity to speak to the Rear Admiral about it. There are, as I understand it, about 345 more people who are in the queue who are being processed.
And how quickly is that onboarding happening?
It's onboarding fairly quickly. They've been able to move fairly quickly in that program. It is also, it's because of its relatively short period of time, there's almost like a probationary period also existing where the Navy can determine if this person's right for the Navy and the person can determine if the Navy's right for them. And so I think there's real value in that program.
Okay, let's talk retention. Recently, your department updated the post-living differential to the Canadian Forces housing differential, which was met with near universal condemnation by forces who have time in. The PLD needed to be updated. However, your department, along with the Treasury Board, did so in a manner that severely impacted long-serving members in a negative way. In some cases, people will actually lose money for getting promoted. And this is including the increase in pay your government brought in at the same time. The provisional post-living differential does nothing to address the actual core concerns of our forces members. So what substantive actions will you take to fix this issue?
We've already done a number of really important things here. First of all, we've added more money into that fund to make it more accessible to more people. There were some changes that were made there because we saw that particularly people in the lower ranks and the lower pay grades were not getting access to the funds that they needed. And so we've made it available to far more of those lower pay grades. But there was obviously an impact on the higher pay grades that did not require that same level of support, but recognizing the impact, and I think this is an important point. You recognizing the impact that it was having on people, we actually implemented a program of phased implementation. So their differential, the support that they receive will be reduced by 1/3 in the first year, 2/3 in the second year.
Okay, perfect. So just in the nature of time, I just have one last question. Have you met with your predecessor and current Minister of the Treasury Board to discuss the burdensome regulations that Treasury Board places on defense? And is there any effort to give your department more latitude or agility in making the time-sensitive decisions that are necessary in the CAF without having Treasury Board stamp everything? You can answer yes or no if you'd like.
I have not had an opportunity to speak to my very busy colleague in her new role, and I in mine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Fillmore, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and Minister Blair, General Eyre, and team. Thank you very much for making time for us today. I'm sorry I'm not with you in person today. I'm in Halifax today. But, Minister, I want to start by just saying thank you to you for attending and, in fact, opening the first ever Halifax International Fleet Week. You've mentioned it a couple of times in your testimony already. That was in September. It was time to complement Operation Cutlass Fury, the NATO anti-submarine warfare exercise hosted every 2 years by the Royal Canadian Navy. Now, as you, I think, heard while you were there, we welcomed somewhere between 1,200 and 1,400 sailors from our NATO allies who joined our own Royal Canadian Navy sailors for an incredible agenda, ships tours, concerts, information booths, including recruitment booths, receptions, and a very hard-fought rugby game with the Royal Navy. And I just want to take this moment to recognize on the record the incredible team at the RCN under Vice Admiral Topshee, including Rear Admiral Jose Kurtz, the fleet commander, Trevor McLean, and his amazing team that brought ships out from behind the curtain of CFB Halifax right onto our city's waterfront. It was incredible outreach. I'll just give you some quick stats. HMCS Moncton had 3,800 visitors over 3 days. HMCS Margaret Brooke, 4,500. HMCS Fredericton, 4,500 people over 3 days. And in just 1 day, HMCS Glace Bay, over 1,000 people. Over 50,000 everyday citizens came down to the waterfront and took part in these festivities. Downtown businesses recorded their best ever second weekend in September for business. And I have to say, all of this is incredible for the inaugural year of what we're going to be doing every 2 years as Cutlass Fury continues. So The impact of this was that it really exposed Canadians to what our serving members do on behalf of Canadians and our NATO allies around the world every single day. So I wonder if you could reflect for us how you view these kind of outreach initiatives as a tool for the Canadian Armed Forces going forward.
Andy, if I was 50 years younger, I'd have signed up myself.
Me too, sir.
It was a terrific day. And you and I have talked about this, but we witnessed it firsthand. I have to tell you how proud I was, but I could see that on the faces of Canadians on the street, visiting on the docks, visiting those sailors. As someone said to me, it's going to be hard for any sailor in this town to buy a drink tonight. And I thought it was a great opportunity for the people of Halifax and Canadians to acknowledge the pride in the armed forces. And an opportunity to say thanks. It really was quite extraordinary. With reflection on the importance of these events, I think we need to do more. And you know, I also reflect about when we have Canadian Armed Forces members who are in a flood-ravaged community or helping evacuate people out of a fire zone. It really is an opportunity for, I think, Canadians to see how truly valuable. You know, sometimes when we talk about the Canadian Armed Forces, and particularly in foreign deployments, and don't get me wrong, those overseas expeditionary deployments are critically important to Canada's interests, but it sometimes feels a little bit remote for the average Canadian. And opportunities like we had during International Fleet Week or deployments, or even when some of our bases open up their doors and invite people in the community in, I think it's a really great opportunity to demonstrate how really important the Canadian Armed Forces is, with all of their proud and glorious history to our country and to its future. So I guess I'm vigorously agreeing with you. It was a terrific day, and I was very grateful to have the opportunity to participate.
Well, thanks for that. You gave a wonderful impromptu and unrehearsed recruitment speech right on the jetty by HMCS Sackville at the opening ceremony that was very well received and very well observed. So thank you for that. The recruitment booth had a tremendous amount of action as well, a number of people visiting it over the 3 days. It'll be interesting to see when stats become available, what kind of blip that caused in recruitment in Halifax. But maybe shifting to the NATO component of this, you know, we're very excited to be hosting Diana, the Defense Innovation Accelerator for the North Atlantic in Halifax very shortly. We've got the Halifax International Security Forum, which is really about global partnerships. And of course, we've got Fleet Week. All of this is helping, I guess, positioning Halifax as a way to illustrate Canada's role in NATO. And so maybe if you had any reflections about the kind of outreach through the NATO lens rather than the recruitment lens, that would be interesting to hear.
Yeah, of course, and I'm glad you mentioned Diana. I did have an opportunity. Actually, I was at the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, and I was meeting with a number of our NATO allies who are present in that fora as well. And we talked a little bit about Halifax, and we talked about the investments that Canada's making. I've also had an opportunity to talk to the Secretary General of NATO. I'm very proud of the investment they're making in North America, and they think Halifax, because of its history, and the community there is a great place for NATO to put its foot down in North America, and so we talked about a lot about that. I would also reflect, if I may. One of the things it's been hard to, if the speaker lets me finish my sentence.
We've had enough reflections on Halifax. Yeah.
You're welcome anytime, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
You know,
This is becoming the Halifax Defense Committee.
Sorry, we had a really good day out there.
Yeah.
Actually, a good week.
I know. I feel like the Grinch who stole Halifax.
No,
thank you,
2 years from now, you'll have to all come with us, because it was worth something. It's worthwhile seeing.
2.5 minutes, Madame Normandine.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I'd like to hear what you have to say, Minister, about transfers. In the context of the military, sometimes when there are transfers, it's very hard on the family, and very often the people in the armed forces have complaints about that. We know that it can be difficult from many perspectives. Do you have anything to say about that?
If I may, I've been hearing the same thing, and I've talked to people about how difficult it can be to go and find a family doctor. I spoke to a colonel who told me that his 12-year-old daughter is not talking to him anymore because she had to uproot from her high school. Those are very human things. Those are very real things for families. And at the same time, we clearly need to be able to deploy people into areas where they are required and to new jobs. It's also part of it's part of the commitment when they join the Canadian Armed Forces. But there are things I think we can do, and I've been talking to a lot of people about how they're able to access housing, how they're able to access a family doctor, access childcare, which is so important to families, provide other types of supports to help facilitate those moves because it is impactful. It's hard on them. And they've shared that with us. And one of the things that I've also learned, we talk about the people who join the Canadian Armed Forces, their families kind of sign up too. And there's a real impact on families. And that's why I think it's very important that in all of our work in finding ways to support the men and women of the service, we also think about ways to support their families.
Merci beaucoup. Sur un autre angle, on sait que
Thank you. In June, the minister announced the qualities that would be required for the people that would be on the new committee for the Royal Military College. Can you tell me about the changes that will be made to the Royal Military College?
First of all, we're bringing forward a new committee that's going to provide oversight. I'm hoping that we'll be able to announce that in the coming weeks. A lot of work has been done. We're looking forward to that. We're also looking at the leadership in those colleges. And just recently, we are going through a process at the RMC in Kingston looking at a new official to be responsible for that unit. We've had to, it's difficult to make sure we get the right person, but it was extraordinary to me. I've just really kind of learned that the Canadian Armed Forces has its own education system, its own health system, its own housing system. They provide all services to the members in their own justice system, their own policing system, for example. And so I think those colleges are critically important places for leadership development. What we have to make sure that the behavior in those places is conducive to learning and supportive of the men and women who pass through those education institutions.
And
that's a priority and a commitment.
We're going to have to leave that answer there. Colleagues, there's no discipline in this committee thus far.
I blame the chair.
Yeah.
I'd like to go on record. I thought I was.
Yeah. I think there's enough blame to go around here. Ms. Matheson, of course, not. 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. The Union of National Defence Employees represents about 19,000 people who serve proudly Canadian defence community, also fall under, of course, your purview. They're firefighters, engineers, workers on the base. They support the military, and I think that they are essential for our security. Sadly, for almost her entire tenure, your predecessor refused to meet with the union leadership of those workers, for which I had to call her out. However, there are major problems with the contracting out of public sector work. And for example, to this day, there are postings on the Canadian Forces Morale and Welfare Services page for non-public fund jobs that are below the federal minimum wage. And I'm wondering if how you're working to ensure that there's oversight of the CFMWS.
To chat about this the other day. It is a concern to me. I will undertake to meet with the union leadership to discuss these issues.
Can you provide a timeline of when you will meet with them?
No, I just said I will do it. You can help me reach out to them and get that time.
Well, interestingly, it's my understanding that they actually already have, so I would hope that you would look into that to ensure that
Yes,
you
ma'am.
follow up on that letter that they've sent you.
Yes, I have not yet seen the letter, but I'm more than willing to meet with the union leadership. I believe in organized labor, and I'd like to talk to them.
Okay, perfect. Can you tell us, however, why those non-public funds for employees, 40% of which are members of military families, are being paid less than the federal minimum wage?
And I don't have an answer to that. I wasn't aware of that. You brought it to my attention. I'll look into it.
Perfect. How much time do I have, Chair?
I have 52 seconds.
Ooh.
That was not 152 million seconds. Yes.
As you know, we're talking about this in committee hopefully shortly in terms about Canadian military housing. They're short thousands and thousands of units. Canada owns quite a lot of land that could be used potentially for some of those military houses. They're underutilized lots. They're near bases. Will you consider partnering with nonprofits and cooperatives to transfer land for the development of affordable housing close to base so military families can stay close to base and help deal with those skyrocketing rent costs?
What I will undertake is that we are looking at a number of I believe could be very innovative solutions. There is a significant deficit of housing for the Canadian Armed Force members, almost 7,000 housing units as I understand it. I think that there are some, very innovative ways. You've referred to a couple of them, but we're going to examine all of the ways we might be able to move forward. We do, as you've already indicated, we have land, but we don't necessarily have enough resources to do that. But I think there are some very innovative ways that we could approach that and get that done.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Ms. How half a minute becomes 2 minutes? Yes. Ms. Gallant, 5 minutes.
Thank you. Minister, what do you consider to be the most imminent external threat facing our nation?
Yes, ma'am. I could talk in geopolitical terms, and quite frankly, the activities of Russia in the invasion of a sovereign country, I think is a direct threat to the rules-based order that really is an agreement among nations on how each nation should be secure. And I think that is a significant threat to us. It's one of the reasons we so vigorously support the effort of Ukraine.
On our territory.
And I'm going to get to that. We're also seeing other hostile nations, and I would reference particularly China, which is also demonstrating a disregard for that rules-based order, and there are other nations as well. I think there is a very significant threat, and it's one of the reasons we work so carefully with our allies in order to secure that, and we're making significant investments to.
And what do you see as the emerging battle space domain?
Well, a couple of places. Obviously, there are some places I am very concerned about the Arctic. I think the Arctic is a place of vulnerability for us. But I might reference not just a physical domain, but a cyber domain. And I think that is a very significant challenge to us. I have the chief here with me, and I'm sure she'll be more fulsomely be able to think. But that is a domain where we are being attacked every single day and every hour of every day. And it is necessary for us to vigorously defend Canada's interests in that domain as well.
And have you put any plans in motion to start defending our low Earth orbit domain?
Yes, ma'am. We work very closely with our allies in that regard. There has been a significant increase in the capacity and capability of those who are hostile to our interests, and we are working with our allies to respond to that.
It's very difficult to even have one of our submarines in the water at a given point in time. So where is Canada in the procurement of a replacement submarine for the Victoria class?
Right. I have been briefed. The Victoria class submarine are still in operation, obviously, but they are aging out. And
there's no order already being placed, or the procurement process hasn't started.
No,
for the new fleet.
We've not made an order, but there is work ongoing in order to look at the best path forward for Canada. There are a number of options available to us. We are also speaking very closely with our allies. I would also mention we've had discussions quite recently, the Chief of Defense and myself, with some of our allies with respect to some work that is being done, particularly among our Five Eyes allies, in various platforms and investments that we believe will inform the decisions we have to make with respect to the replacement of the Victoria-class submarine.
Troop morale is the lowest it's been in a quarter of a century. How will you instill the confidence in our military members that they've lost after being put into theater without helmets, without food provisions, reliable transport, modern anti-tank weapons, counter-drone systems, a dedicated short-range air defense system to guard against helicopters and attack planes?
Well, we did not put people into harm's way without helmets, but I'm aware of what you're reporting on. I think we do that. We address the morale. First of all, by creating that safe, inclusive, and respected work environment for every member of the service. I think we also do that by demonstrating our commitment to make significant investments in the ships, the planes, the platforms that they need, and the equipment that they need to make sure that they have a modern capability. I've come to understand how important kit can be to the men and women who serve. And finally, I think we also do that by our expeditionary and domestic engagements, where if the people join the Canadian Armed Forces and I think are proud to serve in these deployments in Latvia, in the Indo-Pacific region, and around the country.
And when will our first extra supply ship, or our next supply ship, be delivered?
I don't actually have the schedules for that. The deputy minister might be able to provide that in the next round
we'll
of questions.
do that later then.
Yeah, I was going to suggest you ask him.
Okay, so what steps are you taking to ensure the Canadian Armed Forces have the naval capabilities, air support, air defense, ground support, and the firepower that we ask them to do when we ask them to do it?
Yes, ma'am. And those procurements, the ones that we have already committed to, are moving forward apace, and we I think we remain on track. Although there's always challenges with the delivery of some of those very significant investments, but we are proceeding with them. And as well, I've had a number of conversations. There are other procurement decisions that we are on the cusp of making, and I'll announce that when it's appropriate.
Thank you, Ms. Gallant. Mr. May, final 5 minutes. Welcome back to the committee. And before you start your question, I just want to, on behalf of the committee, thank you for your work in the last 2 years. You contributed mightily to the functioning of this committee, which I think functions at a pretty high level. And I know you did a lot of work. And I just wanted to publicly acknowledge your last 2 works. Thanks. 2 years.
Wow.
5 minutes.
Yeah, I don't know what to.
You won't get that.
I don't know what to say to that other than to say I hope that doesn't count against my time, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, time's up.
I am very pleased to be subbing in for a very capable new parliamentary secretary who wasn't able to be here. But thank you for that, Mr. Chair. I'm gonna have to clip that. That's. We're going to put that out there for posterity. Back to you, Minister. Your first question, actually, from Mr. Bazan, had alluded to potentially some good news. I would like to hear that good news regarding recruitment and retention from General Eyre, if that's possible.
Well, it is. I think the fact that we've reversed the trend, and the general in the next hour, and I might suggest the best use of the time is to let him use that hour, but we've reversed the trend, and in fact, the number of people joining is now exceeding, for the first time in nearly 3 years, the attrition, the people that are leaving. And that is good news. And I think it is reflective of some really outstanding work that the Canadian Armed Forces and their recruiting teams have been doing across the country. I'm going to take a moment, 2 things. 2025 for the next supply ship. Got you an answer? I'll try to get you an answer as quickly as possible. And can I also take just a moment, and I don't want it to take it from his time, I also wanted to thank Brian for his exceptional work. And even when I was named as the new Minister of National Defense, he spent a lot of time with me, and he talked to me about his many, many visits to bases and wings right across the country, and he shared with me what he had heard. It was incredibly important, and I just wanted to acknowledge that his heart is in this, and he's been an incredible advocate for the Canadian Armed Forces in our government, and I'm hoping he'll continue to be so. So thank you.
Thank you, Minister. That was very special. Thank you. He's going to start calling for time now.
He always does. It's okay.
I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about, and you alluded to this a little bit, but a number of us had an amazing opportunity to travel overseas this past summer to the UK, to Latvia, to Romania, Estonia, not Romania, Poland, Estonia, to visit with a number of our troops over there and see. And everywhere we went, our partners and allies said they wanted more Canada. And can you speak? And you've said a little bit already today, but maybe you can elaborate on Canada's contributions to international peace and security on the international stage, not just in Europe, but also in the Indo-Pacific.
I think we've all heard the call from our NATO allies, for example, and some of our Five Eyes partners about the need to increase Canada's capabilities and participation in the regions. But what I've observed when I went and visited them as well, Brian, is God bless them, our people are punching way above their weight. And I had the opportunity, like you all did, to go to Lyd, or some of you did, to go to Lyd and see the work that our armed forces members, privates and corporals and sergeants, training Ukrainian recruits, and you could see like the way in which they did that would take your breath away. It made you so proud of the work that they were doing, and watching those Ukrainian soldiers get on the bus and head off to the front was also, it causes you to choke. You can't, you couldn't care about people if you weren't really moved by that. But what I have heard, I've spoken to the defense minister in Latvia, for example. They are so proud of and pleased with the Canadian commitment in their country in that enhanced forward presence, and they've said, actually, the defense minister told me that the Canadian flag is the most popular flag in his country right now. And that's directly because of the Canadian Armed Forces. It's the men and women of the forces that are causing that pride in our country. And so let me be very clear. We've got to do more. And we are going to do more. The CAF has already made a commitment to increase the brigade strength in Latvia. We're also much in demand in a number of other regions, and you talked about Poland and Estonia and in the UK and in other places. We are going to do more, but the men and women that we've already deployed are making it a lot easier, and frankly, they're increasing demand for our service there.
And I'm pretty sure I'm getting close on time, but I'll use the rest of my time to simply say thank you to all of my colleagues here on committee. Regardless of political stripe, this was an amazing group to be working with. Thank you to Minister Anand. Thank you to you, Minister Blair. But also thank you to the people behind us. The staff team with National Defence were just top-notch, amazing to work with. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. It gives me great pleasure to cut you off one last time, Mr. May. So, colleagues, that brings us to the end of the minister's hour with us, and I just want, on behalf of the committee, thank you for your time here, Minister Blair. You've made several offers to the committee to cooperate and to review various priorities and possibly legislation. It would be my intention, and I'm sure the committee's intention, to take you up on that, and we'd like to do it probably sooner rather than later. So we will, by some means or another, schedule some sort of working group so that we can work towards the goal that we all have, which is to have the best military services that we have, that this nation is entitled to. So, again, thank you, and we look forward to your next appearance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the members for your warm welcome, and I'm very sincerely, I am looking forward to working with you all. I think we share the same purpose, and scheduling permit, I'll come back as quickly as possible.
Meeting suspended. So we're going to hit it. Hit it. There we are. So, welcome. And we'll start with our questions. Mr. Bazan, 5 minutes. Oh, sorry. Mr. Kelly, 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'm going to start, perhaps, I don't know if this question is for Mr. Matthews or General Air, but how many 155 shells are being produced in Canada right now per month?
Mr. Chair, first of all, not enough. Secondly, 3,000.
3,000 is the monthly.
That is my understanding.
Okay. Is that out of GDOTS?
GDOTS.
Okay. All right. So they are now producing shells. At what is the production capability of that facility? Like what can we realistically get up to quickly?
Maybe I'll start, Mr. Chair, and the Chief will chime in. Conversation about upgrading production of ammunition, 155 or other. It's a long process, requires investment, and there are discussions underway about potentially investing to upgrade production, but it is not a quick fix.
Okay, why not? This is the hottest, perhaps the hottest military commodity in the world right now. Every allied military that fires 155 shells needs 155 shells. Why is there no urgency on getting the production ramped up?
So I think two things, Mr. Chair. Number one, and the Chief may have to help me here, there is variants of 155, and the production of 155 in Canada is not, I'll call it the most desirable variant. So when you talk about upgrading production, we're also talking about new machinery, et cetera, to make a different type of 155. And so those discussions are underway, but it's a pretty big investment. Chief can help me out with variants here.
No, Mr. Chair, you've identified an issue that I am extremely concerned about because it underpins our own lack of readiness in this area. And we do need a sense of urgency, more of a sense of urgency in this area. But along with increasing industrial capacity, we need the contracts that go along with that to be able to produce the ammunition, to get the additional production lines open, et cetera, et cetera. We have not produced one additional round of ammunition in this country since February of 22. So yes, this is something that greatly concerns me.
So to be clear for the record, the 3,000 per month is the same production as before the beginning of the war in Ukraine?
Yes, and I'll add those are the M107 variants. What we need are the M795 variants, which we do not have the production capability for in Canada yet.
Okay, I can't even...
I can get into I can geek out on the details with you if you want, but...
Well, given that previous witnesses last week gave us almost no meaningful information, take half a minute for some of those details.
So the M107 variant is a shorter distance, so the range is shorter. The kill radius is less, and the accuracy is less. The M795 variants, which we consider the operational round, which we prefer to use in operations, has about a 5 kilometer longer range, more precise, and has a wider kill radius, if you will. That being said, the M107 will still work, but not as good as the 795, which we hope to retool to.
Is it not fair to say that literally every allied country is searching for this class of ammunition? How on earth could there not be contracts, given that there are decades of production are being expended very quickly in the war in Ukraine?
No, Mr. Chair, you are right. Every NATO Chiefs of Defense meeting I go to, this is an issue of discussion. Our allies are rightly very concerned about this, and we're all looking at ways of ramping up production. And it is of increasing concern because we take a look at the Russian reconstitution ability. They're actually reconstituting at a faster rate than we anticipated. And so in order to continue to, one, ensure that we've got our own proper stocks, and two, ensure that we can continue to support Ukraine for the long term, the accelerated production of artillery ammunition is extremely important.
Is there any possibility for Ukraine to win the war without some type of parity or some type of ability to compete with Russian production and expenditure of artillery?
You know, Mr. Chair, there are many pathways to victory, but as we take a look at the reliance of modern warfare, in fact, warfare for the past 150 years, artillery has been pretty key.
Thank you. tanks, once our battle tanks have fully deployed with the battle group commitment in Latvia and also with the tanks that have already been sent to Ukraine, how many tanks are operational tanks are left for either further deployment or training?
So, Mr. Chair, I'm going to have to do some math here. So we started with 82 tanks. We donated 8 to Ukraine. We're deploying 22 to Latvia. And so the math, just very quickly here, doing it in my head. I've got the accountant sitting beside me here, 52.
Are those 52 tanks all operational, fit to either deploy or for use for training?
Mr. Chair, no. I don't know the rate off the top of my head. I do know what the overall serviceability rate of Army vehicles is, and it's not good. And it goes down to a shortage of spare parts, national procurement funds, and technicians.
Okay, so the 82 mine.
Thank you. There's a 5-minute round, not a 6-minute round. Mr. Collins, 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. My questions will be to whoever so chooses to answer. First, I want to talk about Operation Lentis in terms of the minister talked about that, and Christine had a question about that one earlier. And we've witnessed just some incredible natural disasters spurred by climate change over the last number of years. They're happening more often, and I think that by extension, they're probably draining your resources and your ability to serve in different respects. So the question that I would have is, to the minister's point about providing appropriate supports and ensuring that those that are serving in CAF have the appropriate resources. Do you have any idea? Do you have a plan in terms of understanding you're going to be called on more often on an annual basis as to, from a personnel perspective, from an equipment perspective, from a resource perspective? How do you continue to provide supports to provinces and territories, knowing that you've been stretched thin in other areas? Through you, Mr. Chair.
So, Mr. Chair, you have hit on an issue that is another issue of great concern because with these increasingly frequent deployments, call-outs, it's affecting our readiness to do our primary function. What is required is additional capacity to respond to natural disasters at the provincial and municipal level. Make no mistake about it, the Canadian Armed Forces needs to remain that force of last resort. But more and more frequently, we're being called upon as the force of first choice. And so natural disasters, the intensity, the frequency means the calls upon us are not going away, but more capacity is required. This also speaks to some of the force design, force development challenges that we are facing. There's an inherent tension between high-tech, precision, on one hand, and mass on the other. And we need to find that, and responding to natural disasters, things like the war in Ukraine, require a certain degree of mass. While on the other hand, many of the advanced technologies, the advanced capabilities that are out there require that precision, that high-tech piece. So finding the balance between those two is a challenge that we are struggling with.
And sir, can I ask from a budget perspective then, what does that mean to you in terms of you're now being forced to provide more resources, and by extension you're spending monies that you have in your budget? What kind of allocation have you had to provide now with the number of events that you've had to respond to versus 3 to 5 years ago?
Maybe I'll start, Mr. Chair. The way our funding model works is the organization absorbs the first $100 million in operation costs every year, and everything beyond that we are reimbursed from the center. So no direct flow of additional resources, but I think the chief, if I'm allowed to ask the chief a question, might be worth the chief to explain the regular pattern of deploy, recover, prepare, and the impact of these deployments on the regular cycle of CAF preparations.
So the DM hit it right, Mr. Chair. Generally there's a train phase, there is a deploy phase, and then there's a recover phase. In the train phase, you're preparing for the deployment. In the deploy phase, you're on expeditionary operations. And when you're in the recover phase, you are reconstituting yourself, reconstituting your unit, getting back with your family. As these domestic deployments increase, that cycle becomes increasingly more challenged and increases the personnel tempo for deployment, which has a knock-on effect on issues like recruiting or like retention.
And then from an equipment perspective, any special needs in that regard in terms of you're responding more often? You're being stretched across the entire country. This is no longer a regional issue that on the West Coast or East Coast. This is all across the country. So do you have special capital requirements related to the number of responses you're responding to?
So, Mr. Chair, it puts increasing stresses on our airframes, for example, those that we use for evacuation. So our transport aircraft, helicopters, for example, wheeled vehicle fleet, which to start off with, our numbers are low, and so they get used more than what would regularly be the case. So yes, they increase the overall stress on mostly land and air fleets.
I have about 30 seconds left. If I could, in terms of housing, could you just give us a brief snapshot in terms of the challenges you're facing with providing housing to those that serve?
Well, Mr. Chair, this is probably the number one issue that comes up as we travel around the country. Like every Canadian, housing is an issue, but it's more acute for our people as we expect them to move across the country, which they have to based on where our operational bases are. And so housing, getting assistance with housing, building more housing needs to be right at the top of the list of our personnel care issues. We're about somewhere in the neighborhood of 5,000 to 7,000 housing units short across our footprint, given our current size.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Madame Normandin, 5 minutes.
5 minutes, Madame Normandin. Thank you very much. My first question would be for Mr. Matthews. The minister mentioned that one of the places where there could be cuts made would be with respect to external professional services. Under the McKinsey study, we realized that after immigration, you were the second largest department using external work. So with respect to external firms, will you move back towards the public servants that are part of your department, I would imagine? So how many over the past year would represent the total of external contracts that you let? Thank you for your question. Yes, we can share the figures with the committee to better explain the numbers for external contracts.
The examination of contracts. I think there's an assumption by many people that the external contracts are all the management consulting firm types that we talked about at previous committees. The vast majority of our contracts are maintenance and repair, health services, and so we will get you the split in terms of the consulting type contracts, but the vast majority of our spending on contracts is on those value add things that the chief and the minister mentioned earlier. The other point I would say, and I know the increase in the services and contract spending has gotten people's attention, but we are also growing on the civilian side. So that growth in external contracts has not come at the expense of civilian growth. We are growing on both fronts, and it relates to the implementation of the existing defense policy, Strong, Secure, Engaged.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. A question now for General Eyre about limitations. I'll come back with more detail, but the minister indicated that it was the families also can be hurt when when there's a member that signs up. But there are also divorces that are the result of this. Can you indicate, is it possible to work towards greater flexibility? Can you transfer people from the reserves to the regular forces and from the regular forces to the reserves on the condition that they could come back when they are released? And in that sense, you wouldn't be losing a member of the forces. Thank you so much for your question. The transfer between components is one way of keeping talent in our ranks, and I am very interested in improving the possibilities for transfers between reserve and regular members. Recently, we increased the capacity to processing transfers between the two. I think that is a good way of keeping talent, and we should continue to encourage transfers between those two components. Thank you. On the matter of ammunition, I think it should be Mr. Kelly. One of the problems with respect to the adequate supply in terms of munitions is that is this an issue of national security, that there is this lack of ammunition, which is really quite simple, but does that have an effect on the long-term security of the country? Can you correct that? Absolutely, yes. It is a major, major issue for us.
Our ammunition stocks. As we take a look at our ammunition holdings, we look at what we call battle-decisive munitions, and there's 20 plus of those. And NATO asks us to, for our NATO high readiness forces, asks us to have what's called 30 days of supply. If we were to consume munitions, the same rate that we're seeing them in Ukraine, we would be out in some cases in days, and it would take years to restock. Donc, c'est une préoccupation de moi.
So this is a major concern for me. I would like to increase the stock of our ammunition and munitions in general.
Madison?
So actually, getting back to what was being said in terms of that contracting out on maintenance services, facility services, I, of course, am too very concerned about that privatization piece and of course, where we can ensure that good-paying, unionized public service working jobs are kept within the public service. The department, in 2018, the Assistant Deputy Minister of Review Services published a report titled Audit of Contracted Facilities Maintenance Services, which found that there was no evidence that facilities maintenance services has the ability to complete a value for money analysis on outsourcing. So the department is the single largest landowner in Canada, and their facilities management services are outsourced, but there's no idea of how that's happening and the best move for that. So can you actually give us an update from that report on what the changes that you have made in terms of reaction to that report, ensuring that those department cuts aren't just blind outsourcing, because ultimately from this report itself, it says that it is.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's a couple of points there, and when I have engaged with union leadership, this is usually the first issue we talk about. The change that was put in place that's the most significant since that report is when there is a proposal to change the service model from public servants to an outsourced model, it needs to be supported by a business case. And so that change was made, I'm going to say 3 years ago. I will say we have seen very few business cases come forward in that point. So there's been really no change in the status quo. Where we do get some tension is when there are public service jobs that remain empty that are critical on base. You will see contracts put in place as a temporary stopgap. And I think in some cases that stopgap continues longer than was initially intended to, because it does fill the immediate need, when the real work should be to actually staff the position. We have some locations in Canada where we are struggling to find public servants to occupy those jobs, not just on base facilities, but in other trades as well. And so you have seen contracts used to temporarily fill a gap. But I've seen no change in terms of structure, in terms of moves to permanently outsource facilities maintenance, et cetera, since I've been here at Defence.
Well, ultimately, what would be the reasoning for a company that could fill it at a lower pay rate, because ultimately a private corporation would take a part of that contract versus somebody who is provided with full-time work, ideally at specific pay levels, unless those pay rates are not sufficient, and benefits that would go along with it? What are the reasons?
I think it depends on the geographic location. There are flexibilities, different models that private sectors have used to fill the gap. But it does beg the question if they can find people, and in some cases they're paying less. In some cases they're paying more hourly, but the benefits are not the same. At the end of the day, employees vote with their feet. And so if they would prefer to be working for the private provider, that's their choice.
Going to move on. In April, the Prime Minister announced that Canada would be providing arms and 2.4 million rounds of ammunition to the Ukraine, manufactured at Colt Canada. Defense officials then walked that back, saying that they, in fact, were not fulfilling that Canadian-made commitment, and that Colt Canada, or Colt's parent company, would not guarantee that they were being made in Canada. Now, there was a story additionally published by David Puglisi about a memo that you sent to Minister Anand in August of 2022, where you stated, for a variety of reasons, Canadian munitions suppliers have been unable to provide the types or quantity of operational munitions required in response to the invasion of Ukraine. You recommended to the Minister of the Department of National Defense and PSPC that they use non-disclosure agreements when talking to industry about domestic manufacturing capabilities. Can you talk about that and the impact that that has on transparency in terms of your department?
Certainly, when you're in negotiation or potential negotiation or discussions with industry about what it would take to change production, an NDA is very standard practice because you may be having different conversations with different companies. And so that was the genesis for that.
The confusion in terms of announcing that it was Canadian made, but in fact it was not?
Sometimes plans change. I can dig into the details in this one, but you know, you often talk to industry or talk to employees and you think something is possible, and then you find out there's a delay. In the case of Ukraine, urgency is job one. So, you know, finding the quickest way to ship available ammunition, and if that means we have our stocks replenished later, that's fine too. So urgency is job one, and that was what was driving that conversation.
Thank you, Ms. Masson. I think we have time, colleagues, to get in a full round, so 5 minutes. Ms. Cramp-Nyman.
Thank you. First question. Earlier, Minister Blair mentioned that he's building on the work of his predecessor, Minister Anand, and her suggestion was that we need to continue to build resources, especially in the area of personnel. So my concern is the discrepancy between numbers in an order paper question that we received back in April. So if we're talking numbers, based on the order paper question, we're about 8,000 personnel short for the regular force and 1,000 for the reserve force. But there's discrepancy because other numbers suggest that we're 16,000 personnel short with another 8,000 personnel short on the reserve side. So just looking through the numbers, are you able to clarify with us what the numbers are for the Canadian Army, the Royal Canadian Navy, the Royal Canadian Air Force, the Canadian Special Operations Forces Command, the Canadian Forces Intelligence Command? Because there's discrepancy, the numbers aren't adding up.
Mr. Chair, it's important to state that a guiding principle is truth has a date timestamp. And so what was true in one day will not necessarily be true the next day, especially with regarding numbers, personnel strengths. I can give you our numbers effective as of the 21st, actually as of the 31st of August for the Canadian Armed Forces. So the difference between our authorized strength and our total strength for the regular force is 7,862.
Okay.
For the reserve force, it is 7,605. You add that up, it's just shy of 16,000 short in the total force. The important figure on the regular force side is the difference between our trained effective establishment and our trained effective strength. So those that we can put out the door to do the job. And right now that number is 10,489 as of the end of last month. And so those people are in the training system, but they're not ready for operations yet. And so this is something that we watch very closely. It speaks to the need to continue to bring people in. I can talk about some of the successes we've had and how we're cautiously optimistic at this point, if you wish.
Perhaps I'll lead right into the next question. Back in February, earlier this year, I posed a question outlining the need for the retention of CAF from highly technical domains such as cyberspace, including the addition of 120 new military intelligence positions and 180 new civilian intelligence positions. And I asked if this goal had been effectively achieved and what are the numbers in this particular domain, if you're familiar with them. So we were hoping to get some of those numbers circled back. So I just wondered if you had those.
Mr. Chair, I don't have the exact numbers for those occupations, but those technical occupations are ones that we are very concerned about. They have highly marketable skills. There's a shortage across our country, and we see just the general labor shortage writ large in the country, especially skilled labor in those fields, it's hard to hold on to people. I am happy to report I got good news today. Our attrition rate overall is down to 7.1%. So back within historic norms. You know, for a while over the pandemic, we were up to 9.1, 9.2%, which was of concern. So this is, again, feeds into my narrative of being cautiously optimistic.
So the question I'd like to pose next is how much of that was relevant to letting people go with regards to COVID?
That is for this fiscal year, so 0.
Okay, fair enough.
Going back.
Sorry. Next question. So changing gears here, the government has recently announced budget cuts to the DND. Given that discussion here today, we're talking personnel shortages are apparent, equipment shortages are more than clear and abundant. So how are the additional funding cuts going to impact the armed forces' ability to serve and protect Canadians?
Mr. Chair, there's no way that you can take almost $1 billion out of the defense budget and not have an impact. So this is something that we're wrestling with now. I had a very difficult session this afternoon with the commanders of the various services as we attempt to explain this to our people. Our people see the degrading, declining security situation around the world, and so trying to explain this to them is very difficult.
Madame Lambropoulos, 5 minutes, please.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions also with regards to retention and recruitment. And so I guess my first question is, I can't remember what the answer had been. I believe we've asked this before, but are there exit interviews when people are leaving and choosing to leave the forces?
Mr. Chair, yes, there are, and we're doing that more and more systematically. We have had exit surveys as well to determine the reasons. I will say the reasons are multifaceted, ranging from family to, there's push and pull factors. The pull factors with the economy for sure, with a very, very tight labor market. The pull factors or the push factors, family, career paths, unwillingness to move, so geographic desire for geographic stability. Every story is somewhat different, but there are a number of themes that are out there. One of the things that we are working to get better at is to have that conversation before the individual makes a decision to release and see what we can do. Bringing in a philosophy of a much more individualized career path. So we don't have to have the cookie cutters post-Korean War, 1950s industrial age personnel management system. Have something that's more fit for the 21st century. The challenge that we have is geography. Vast majority of our population comes from urban locations. Vast majority of our operational bases are rural, or, as the commander of the Navy recently reminded me, in high-price areas on the coast.
So thank you for foreseeing that my newhat are the main reasons why people leave? You mentioned family, and this is somewhere I wanted to kind of head with this question. Canadians are increasingly facing affordability issues across the country. The general population is having a hard time finding a place to live, healthcare, finding a family doctor, and finding childcare nearby. And so I'm assuming that the population and the members of the Canadian Armed Forces also kind of have similar requests and situations and needs that they need met in order to make sure that their families are well taken care of. And I was wondering if there's been any improvements in the last couple of years as to what social services are accessible for the families, and what you're doing on healthcare as well in terms of family of CAF members.
So, Mr.
And I was going to ask about housing, but that was already answered, so I'll stick to these.
Mr. Chair, I was going to say housing continues to be a challenge. In fact, it's an increasing challenge over the last number of years. Healthcare, finding family doctors is something that every Canadian is challenged with. But again, more so for our people as they as they move more frequently and go to the bottom of waiting lists. And so this is something that we're trying to address. Morale Welfare Services has brought in a number of initiatives for some virtual family care with doctors, so we're experimenting with that. We are working with the provinces through the Seamless Canada initiative to try to protect places on those waiting lists so that our people, as they move, are not automatically at the bottom of the list. And so there's a number of initiatives ongoing, but it is still a challenge. It would be greatly welcome.
So you're saying that there are efforts that are being made with, I guess, provincial counterparts that in order to make sure that they have some kind of priority when they're serving in a particular area?
Mr. Chair, we're trying.
Just maybe to make that more real, because when I go visit bases and wings, I hear housing, I hear medical care. Your average stint might be 2 or 3 years, in a location before you have to move. And if you picture a world where you have a child with needs a specialist, take some time to line that up. You hear a lot of cases about we just finally found a specialist and we're moving to the province next door. We got to start over. That is one of the big drivers to retention.
Thank you very much. Another factor that was raised earlier was the fact that right now, just this summer, with all of the natural disasters that have been taking place and the need for personnel to be going towards these issues and helping out Canadians, this is going to be something that we're facing more and more as time goes on. And at the same time, the geopolitical climate is only getting worse as well. So clearly there are going to be very big demands in both of these realms. And so I'm wondering, we mentioned making sure that we're aware of the profound impact that these demands have on the members of the Canadian Armed Forces. Are there mental health supports that are increasing in terms of, the fact that we're more and more needing requiring their services, more and more stressful situations are arising? Have we tried to maintain what they're receiving in terms of services for mental health?
We're way past time. We're going to have to leave it there. I'm sure you'll be able to work it back into another question. Madame Normandine, 2.5 minutes.
2.5 minutes. Mr. Eyre, I'd like to come back to peacekeeping. The number of Canadians that are being deployed is about 58. Can you give us the actual figures that exist today? Is it the same thing?
Monsieur le Président.
Chair, I think that it's almost the same. But as I've already said, truth has a timestamp. And I think, though, that the number is more or less the same. In the spring, given the resources that were available and the extra pressure that was given by Reassurance and Unifier, is the situation in Haiti still a cause for concern? Is this still the case? Chair? We will continue to work with our partners, the federal government, for the situation in Haiti, also with our allies, to find a solution and to support the efforts of other agencies. But it is very difficult to have an intervention force. We have to find a long-term solution for the country, which would include the political system, the economy, and politics itself, and the economy. On the long term, Canada has reiterated its promise to have a 250-person force deployed. Is it realistic? Chair, I think that
Quick reaction force. So I think it's important to note that a quick reaction force, if you want to put 200 troops on the ground, you have to have everything that goes around with that to ensure that force is set up for success. Whether it's intelligence, medical evacuation, sustainment, fires to be able to extract it. A quick reaction force is only used when the situation goes downhill, so it's got to be prepared to fight. So it's a much larger force total than just 200. And so we've got to be very, very judicious about where we would put that type of force and understanding the risks that go along with it.
Madame Masson, 2.5 minutes, please.
So many questions. Excuse me. Just in terms of that hit on transparency and ensuring that the department is doing the best it can. It was recently reported that the amount of no records exist responses to access to information requests for the Department of National Defense has doubled in the last 8 years. There's a lot of historic cases, mismanagement of the ATIPs in national defense, including, of course, the trial of Mark Norman in 2018, where there were intentional circumventions of ATIPs. So I'd like to know if we're going to, or why we haven't, seen more reforms within that ATIP regulations within the department in terms of transparency.
A couple of points here, Mr. Chair. I expect people picture an ATIP function, access to information function, where it's one person or a team who have access to all the information. But the reality is when the request comes in, it goes to the ATIP office and it gets dispersed for the people who are relevant to search their own records. And so the people who work in our ATIP office are effectively just the transmitter of what comes back. The key for us is to remind people of the obligations to safeguard and protect relevant emails and documentation. I think it's particularly challenging on the military side because people move around. And so, that hygiene becomes more challenging. When people change jobs, it's part of cleaning up, but it takes time and effort. And so it's just a matter of reminding people of the obligation. But at the end of the day, when the search happens, we are reporting what the search found, and I acknowledge that there's cases where the records were incomplete.
So ultimately, I mean, the Defense Department has always had a higher level of security. That's always been the case. Why has that increased, however, more than doubled in the last 8 years? Are you saying that's just because people move around more?
No, maybe a number of factors. I couldn't give you a really good answer without speculating. ATIP, the volumes have increased exponentially, so the pressure on the people who do this type of function has certainly gone up. Maybe a matter of less time to spend on these things and feeling rushed.
So should there be actually more people that are doing that job? Would that be helpful?
Life would be easier if there were more people doing that job, but like we've already discussed here today, it becomes a question of where you put your priorities. And, military readiness versus ATIP versus support for families, those are some very tough discussions that we are having.
Thank you, Ms. Madsen. Mr. Brazan, 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, I don't think we need a lot of excuses on ATIP. Part of a democracy is transparency, and so access to that information and sharing it with Canadians is critically important. So I'm hoping that the department and CAF are addressing this in the most serious manner, because the External Monitor and others have really been critical of national defense and getting back on ATIPs, including order paper questions back to us as parliamentarians. And if we're going to have a fully functional democracy, that information is critical. Now, going back to the Canfor Gen memo that both you, Mr. Matthews, and you, General Eyre, had put out about expensions, reductions in the department, and you're saying it's $1 billion. We already know that last year $2.5 billion lapsed in the budget. We know that the year before that, the government allowed $1.2 billion to lapse in the budget. Now we're going to cut it back another $1 billion. Now, the PBO just came out with his report and said that there is too much tail, not enough teeth in the Canadian Armed Forces, that only 31% of every dollar actually goes into military effect. So what are we going to do to make sure we have more teeth, less tail, keep the sharp end of the stick? When you talk about where our troop numbers at, you're saying 10,500 in the queue getting trained. We're short, it's just shy of 16,000 members. I'm hearing from reservists that they aren't getting their skills in their trades trained up fast enough. They're years behind, not months behind. What's going to give here on $1 billion this year? And how are we going to deal with the threat environment that we're in if we're going to continue to cut rather than invest in our Canadian Armed Forces?
Maybe I'll start, Mr. Chair. I suspect General Eyre will jump in as well. So the process to identify proposals for spending reductions, which will lead to, as the Chief said, nearly, I think it's $900 million and change, ramp up over 4 years. We have to prioritize those decisions so they have the least amount of impact possible, acknowledging that there will be impact. And so,
coming out of the forces.
The decisions have not yet been taken, but impacting, minimizing impact on military readiness has to be a driving force behind the decision, and that process is still underway. So,
I sure hope we're not going to hear stories of that. We can't afford to put the fuel in the tanks to train our guys in armor. We're not going to be able to put diesel in the ships that have the Navy go out there and training. We can't afford to do maintenance on our tanks. They're going to continue to sit in depot and nobody taking a look at them. So I just say, we've got to make sure that we're continuing to move forward in training and operations and getting everybody up to skill. Talking about cybersecurity and the world that's there, and for both Madame Xavier and to the CDS and DND as well. When you look at what's happening with Five Eyes, with AUKUS in that second tier in the development, we know that they're looking at AWS for cloud computing and storage, and we know that we're looking at more quantum computing. That cybersecurity aspect is critical. Interoperability with our allies, particularly with the Americans, but also within Five Eyes, is key. What are we doing and how are we moving faster so our allies are taking us serious?
So thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. And I would say that the alliance that we have with our Five Eyes, especially from a communications security establishment, is rock solid. And interoperability from that perspective is actually a big part of the foundation of how we work with our Five Eyes. Because we do share signals intelligence, for example, it is really important that when we do that work together, that delay in being able to share data or share intelligence is not the rationale. So interoperability is actually a very foundational element that we discuss on a regular basis and that we invest in as a Five Eyes, including in the cloud-based space that you're talking about.
I've got only about 30 seconds left. I just want to touch on housing because it's come up a number of times that this is an issue that we have to deal with, and I want this committee to deal with it, and I've tabled this motion in the past, so I want to move it right now that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study on the lack of housing availability on or near bases for the Canadian Armed Forces members and the challenges facing members required to move across the country, that the committee shall hold a minimum of 4 meetings for the duration of the study, and that the committee report its findings and recommendations to the House.
Thank you. Your time's up.
I got a motion on the floor.
You've got a motion on the floor. I'm assuming you don't want to debate it just yet. You don't want to debate it now.
No, I moved it.
Yeah. Okay.
It's moved.
No, he's moved it. It's moved.
Yeah.
It's before the committee. He's already.
Yeah, the notice was given last week.
Yeah. Well.
So I'll just say this. I know that in comments made by our witnesses today, including Minister Blair, housing is an issue that they want to address. This is an open-ended, non-prescriptive way to look at housing that we can actually dive in, have in here the Canadian Forces Housing Authority, as well as other potential housing partners on how we move forward to address this issue. I don't see this as being a partisan issue. I see this as one that can help inform the department, as well as us as parliamentarians, on the best way forward.
Mr. May, looks like we're going to put you to work again.
Thank you, and I know I'm not a permanent member anymore, but I too want to agree that this is an important study. We traveled all over Canada, went to MFRCs all over Canada at all the bases, and housing was key. I would like to potentially add a friendly amendment if that's at all possible, because and I hope it's accepted, because sure, I think it's important to talk about housing, but in addition to housing, one of the absolute critical issues that we dealt with, or that we are having to deal with, is childcare. As the former chair of Seamless Canada, the two biggest issues that were identified that we dealt with back in the spring that are going to be coming back in December with solutions, potential solutions. One of them was, of course, childcare. It is a massive problem when folks are posted. They can't find a home, and they cannot find proper childcare. They go to the bottom of the list if they're being posted and in a different community. And I'm just wondering if the member would be willing to expand on this study slightly to try to tackle both of those issues, given how connected they are in terms of when this is an issue for members.
Do you have
of
that
the armed forces?
Do you have that amendment in writing?
I don't have. I just simply would like to add, like I said, a study on housing and childcare issues around the Canadian Armed Forces. I don't have the language of Mr. Bazan's motion in front of me, but
Before I go to Mr. Brazan, Mr. Fisher, have you got something?
I've got an amended text here for James's motion, if you want me to read it into the record to see
Yes,
if James.
please.
That pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study on the lack of housing availability on or near bases for Canadian Armed Forces members, adding "and their families," adding the word "and the challenges facing members," adding "and their families when they are required to move across the country," adding "including access to childcare, spousal employment, education, and healthcare."
Okay, so there's a amendment on the floor. Do you want to respond to the?
I just see. I know there's some connectivity here. There's some things that military have direct access and availability on or control of, such as the Canadian Forces Housing Authority. I think that makes this that we need to first look at the housing issue. Then I think that the issues around opportunities for families, including childcare, including access to family doctors, including spousal employment opportunities, including other issues around those frequent moves and how it impacts upon the military family, should be a separate study in itself. I think that this one has to be specific, very focused in on the current state of the housing stock that Canadian Forces have. And we hear the horror stories of the PMQs, the barracks, and on-base housing being in very dilapidated conditions, even rodent-infested in cases. Frozen water pipes, lack of insulation, one-pane windows, things along that nature. And then we also know that often they're moved into hot and cold housing markets, depending on where they're stationed across the country, and the impact on those moves. And now we also have the impact of the post-living differential changes that have also impacted how people decide they live together and how they afford their housing. And then you also go into the markets where there is just way too expensive to live in places like Victoria and Toronto and elsewhere, and people are actually living in their vehicles or campers all year because they can't afford an apartment, never mind buy a home. So knowing that's impacting upon those that are currently serving, I think that is a study in itself. I have no problem taking on a secondary study following the housing study to look at things like childcare, family doctors, spousal opportunities in employment and career advancement as a separate issue. But I don't think we should cross the wires on the housing study.
Ms. Matson's up, and then Mr. Fisher.
Well, and I do appreciate that this is being brought forward again, and certainly we had spoken before about working together, potential changes, and so I thought that we would have an opportunity to work those changes in together. However, I would like very much to ensure that there is a conversation about post-living differential and the changes and how that's benefited some, impacted negatively on others. I would like for us to also take into consideration the fact that military housing repairs are such a big question within that as well. And I would really like to ensure that I don't have the exact language, but I would likely some language on inviting leadership of the CF Real Property Operations Group as well as the Canadian Forces Housing Authorities, so that we can ensure that we hear from them. And as part of that.
Invite.
Mr. Fisher.
I won't have to put.
Whenever I think of military serving members, I always want to include their families. I think it's important to include families, and as it pertains to child care, spousal employment, education, and health care. I think it's a good. I think it's a good amendment to James's. We see the importance in the study. I think that we can talk about these things all at the same time.
Mr. May.
Thank you. And I don't fundamentally disagree at all with what Mr. Bazan has said, but I think, you know, in our experience, and we all have had experience on bases, all of these issues are coming from the same root cause. And I think this is why we need to kind of look at this. If we're going to start to do this piecemeal, we're not going to solve the real problem. And the real problem comes from the challenges that CAF members are facing when they are posted. That should be the title of the study. Housing, of course, is a big chunk of that, but so are these other things. So I recognize that housing is front of mind, you know, for all Canadians, not just CAF members, but it's the root cause that we should be focusing on, and that's the posting itself and the causes, the issues that it causes.
Okay, Mr. Fisher, you want to?
I just want to know if we can let our amazing witnesses go. They've been sitting here for a couple of hours, and yeah, I've sat on this committee for a long time, and James is very famous for putting a motion on the floor 4 minutes before the meeting ends, and he smiles as he.
Consider it.
Yeah, well. Anyway, I would request respectfully if we could allow our folks to.
I also move that we adjourn.
That's fine. If we move to adjourn, there's no debate that. Those in favor?
You move to adjourn?
He just did.
Okay, then recorded.
May.
Mr. May. Okay.
Adjourn the meeting or adjourn debate?
The proper dilatory motion to adjourn the debate on the meeting. We are past 5:30. I think I'm not sure if a dilatory motion is necessary, but I'm wondering if maybe unanimous consent is required to move forward to continue.
Recorded.
Mr. Clerk, maybe can
are you moving to adjourn debate on the motion, or are you moving to adjourn
I'm
the
looking
meeting?
for guidance from the clerk in terms of seeing the clock at 5:30. Do we need unanimous consent to continue?
No, you're not. Well, dilatory motion.
They're both dilatory motions. I'm just not sure which one you're moving.
Either's appropriate.
I'm moving that we adjourn the meeting today. Yes.
Recorded.
I think it's just unanimous consent.
No, it's not.
Okay.
Okay. So the motion is to adjourn the meeting. Mr. Fisher?
Sure.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. May? Yes. Mr. Fillmore? I can't hear you, Mr. Fillmore. You're on mute. I still can't hear you, Mr. Fillmore. Ms. Lambropoulos.
Yes.
Mr. Bazan.
No.
Ms. Kramp-Nyman.
No.
Mr. Kelly.
No.
Ms. Gallant.
No.
Ms. Normandin.
No.
Ms.
Oh
Matheson.
man, I gotta. So wait. No, but like, there's a clear difference. There is a clear difference between concluding the meeting or concluding debate. Because if we conclude the meeting, we continue debate at the next meeting. Then, yay.
So the motion passes.
The yeas have it?
The yeas have it.
Okay. Meeting is adjourned. In this strange fashion, I do want to thank you all for appearing. Interestingly, I think in some respects you did move the debate. by your appearance and the comments you have had over the last 2 hours. So thank you for appearing, and it is the democratic fashion. There we are. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.